I said, well, it just so happens that, Steve Elkinton, who is the national program leader for the National Trail System for the National Park Service, is going to be in town, and, would you mind if, and we had planned to get together, would you mind if Steve came down? And so as it's turned out, I get to give Steve the program. I don't get to say it. I don't have to say anything, so much. For those of you who may not know, the North Country National Scenic Trail, the National Administrative Authority is the National Park Service. The National Trail System, in the National Trail System, there are 11 National Scenic Trails. We are one of 11. Some are administered by the Forest Service, and I think one or two by BLM, or at least parts of it by BLM. So, but we, as a North Country Trail, are administered by the National Park Service. And Steve leads the program for the National Park Service that oversees and manages and administers our trail, as well as a number of others that he'll talk about. Steve's also on the interagency committee, which is the committee the joint authority, if you will, of representatives from each of the national entities that manage the trails. So Steve represents the Park Service on that as well. So before I do that, though, I think it's really appropriate to share and show this. This is an award that you won. that you won as the members of our association. We were the recipients of the Midwest Region of National Park Service Outstanding Friends Group Award this past year. Out of all of the, I think there's 13 states in the Midwest region, and of all the national park units and programs and non-units in the 13 state region in the Midwest, the North Country Trail Association came out on top. And not only did we come out on top, this was the first year of this particular award. We outdistanced the competition so much that they actually are going to create new categories for it next year, because it was just not fair to compete with us. So anyway, congratulations on winning. I'm going to put it up there. You can come up and touch it. I already got my fingerprints all over it, so it's no big deal. And I'd like to introduce Steve Elkinton.
Well, when I was invited to come, I wasn't quite sure what to say, so I've just jotted down some notes, but most of this I'd like to really answer your questions. People ask me, what do I do? And I sit at a computer like a lot of us do in office jobs, in a little 10 by 10 cubicle in a building that doesn't have very good windows. So, and with the cutback on federal travel, I barely get out anymore. So a trip like this to me is a real privilege, and to have a twofer where I can meet with the state trail coordinators, the folks meeting in Grand Rapids, and while we're here, they're doing a walking tour of the waterfront of Grand Rapids with the head of Parks and Rec for the city of Grand Rapids, learning all the secret ways they got money to do that. But that's a good group of people. But then when I heard that this chapter meeting was going on, I said, I've got to come. And one of the reasons I had to come is because I had a connection to this part of the country, which I'll reveal here in a second. What county are we in here? There. And you have a neighboring county of Kalamazoo. And you have a city there called Kalamazoo. And there's a college there called Kalamazoo. Well, I graduated from Kalamazoo. So are there any K College alums here? None of you are K College alums. Well, anyway.
We're all Western.
We're all Western. Well, I know what you're saying. But in those days, my dad complained because when I went off to college, well, I was the third of 3 boys, and when I set up, I went to boarding school before I went to college. When I went to boarding school, and the next one was going to Oberlin College, and the next one to Brown, my dad complained that he was paying $6,600 that year. The 3 of us, okay? That shows how long ago it was. But this is back in the days of the Vietnam War protests and, LSD on campus. I mean, it was a crazy time.
What year were you?
So I graduated in '69, so I have a big reunion coming up pretty soon. And I haven't kept up with the college very much. This is about as close as I've gotten to K College in years and years and years, although I have some friends from those days that we get together privately and reunion different places.
Still the same.
So one of the things I remember about Kalamazoo, other than not having a car, so I was bicycling and walking around a lot in the snow, was walking on what became the Cal Haven Trail. And in those days, it still had rails, so I learned to, do this kind of thing. And now that I'm getting older, I realize for my balance practice, I need to get back to doing that, otherwise I'll fall off. So, later in my career, I kind of circled around Pittsburgh. So this was sort of, I grew up in Philadelphia and I came out here to go to college, and then what happened after that? I went to Washington DC to work for a Quaker organization during the Vietnam War, and then I traveled around a little bit, and then I came back to Philadelphia to graduate school, and then I moved to Pittsburgh, and then I went back to Washington and got married, and then I moved out to Ohio for 4 years, and then moved back to Washington again. So I was in this sort of spiral, but Michigan was always out here. So I did learn to drink Vernors. So one of the things I did in graduate school was to study to be a landscape architect, and thought I would be designing parking lots and campuses and stuff like that, and parks. I had a chance to join the National Park Service 33 and a half years ago, and had a really interesting career with basically 3 jobs. The first job as a landscape architect, mostly working in the National Capital Region on projects there. The second job as a landscape architect at Cuyahoga Valley in Ohio, which started out as a weird project and ended up as a national park. And one of the things I got to do there, because as a landscape architect, they threw all the stuff that nobody else wanted to do, was to be the park trail coordinator. Now, I'd never built a trail, I didn't know how to do trails, but I worked with all these great volunteers from Cleveland, Akron area, and the Buckeye Trail, which is, I think Ohio's distinguished as the only state that I know of that has a circumferential trail all the way around it. Now, 2/3 of it is now also the North Country Trail, but in those days it was just Buckeye Trail. And actually, no, the North Country Trail had been created, but I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know there was a national trail system. And I became, so I came back to the job in Washington. I was in LA, and then became this trails job, took this trails job in 1989, and tried to fit some of my landscape architecture talents and so on to the trail system. But the trail system really, though, is a system of people. And you're the lifeblood of that. So the volunteer, the committed volunteer, is what makes all of these trails work. And so I've learned that the real skills I need to have, if I have any at all, isn't designing a trail or putting in an access road or signs. Those are important. The real important part is networking with the folks that make the trail happen. So that's why it's such a privilege to come meet with you. So what I want to do very briefly is talk about the National Trail System as it is today. And I'm proudly wearing the logo of the National Trail System, which is not a government logo. This is run by a nonprofit group that you belong to, the Partnership for the National Trail System, which is a coalition of all of the scenic and historic trail groups. We'll get to that in a minute. Has anybody any idea when the National Trail System, this isn't the North Country Trail, but when the National Trail System as a system was created by law?
1927.
Not quite that far back. It was one of the years I was here at K College. 1968. That pivotal year, 1968. People talk about the sort of the turning of history. October 2nd, the Wild-Sink Rivers Act and the National Trail System Act were passed the same day. They were both the strong creatures of Senator Gaylord Nelson, who had been governor of Wisconsin and came to Washington, I think, about a term or two before that, and pushed through a lot of conservation legislation, but these were ones he felt very strongly about. And he got it through. One of the houses, it was a unanimous vote, and the other one, it was just a roll call vote, so whoever was there registered for it. There wasn't any opposition to it at the time, despite the other controversies that were going on. So we have this National Trail System. Ooh, I brought you, in my backpack, there are some maps. You'll see a stack, I think they're about enough for everybody, about 50 maps in there, yeah. Just look in the big zipper in the top, and you see all these maps. There are now 30, as Bruce had mentioned, there are 30 national trails created by Congress, of which the North Country Trail is one of 11 national scenic trails. There are also 19 national historic trails. So I didn't know if any of you, have traveled to like the Lewis and Clark sites out west, or the Oregon Trail, or the Santa Fe Trail. There's a trail in Hawaii, if any of you vacation have been on to Hawaii, called the Alakakai that's waiting for you. We have a lot of trails in the Southwest that deal with Spanish American history. We have the Civil Rights March route from 1965, just a few years before the trail system was established, down in Alabama, the Selma and Montgomery Trail. There's one little state, and it's a neighbor of yours, that has no pieces of this trail system in it yet, just one, and that's Indiana. Every other state, all 49 states and DC have pieces of this. A bunch of the newer trails you may not be familiar with that are shown on there are in the Chesapeake Bay region. We have the Captain John Smith Trail, which is a route of exploration from the Jamestown settlement time of 1608 and 9. And then we have the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route, which is a chapter of the American Revolution when the French came to help the Americans, and Rochambeau was the general, and General Washington got together and basically decided instead of taking the British on to New York, they'd march down to Yorktown and box in Cornwallis, which they did and win the war, so that's kind of cool. And then we have a trail from the War of 1812, the war everybody forgot, called the Star-Spangled Banner Trail, which commemorates the writing of the national anthem. So this trail system is filling up with all kinds of interesting and odd chapters, and it's been great for me. What I should have been at KA College was either a history major or a geography major, because those are the fields that I learned a lot about. So the trail system has grown from 2 original trails, which are the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, to 30. And I credit it with being a huge vision. I don't even think that people who can, you read the hearings from 1967 and 68, I don't think the senators and congressmen who are behind it really had an idea how this thing could grow, but it has. And at the same time, there are huge challenges in making them, and you obviously are right at the forefront of dealing with those challenges: trail corridor protection, trail construction, local community relations, trail location, mapping, all the things that we all wrestle with. I would guess the most controversial issue, certainly historically, the most controversial issue has been land acquisition. And in the case of the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, they've had access to eminent domain. And it's been used sparingly, but used in about 5% of the cases. Most of those cases actually to clear title rather than to take the land, but you're dealing with an old colonial claim in the mountains of Appalachia, and nobody knows quite where that tree was. It was mentioned in the 1792 deed. The only way the government can get it is to do what's called a friendly condemnation, and that way you can take it and then settle the boundaries in court, which they do. But since then, the other trails have been, in fact, it was the North Country Trail getting ready to be established in 1980, as I remember, was the year it came on. Members of Congress, and of course, remember 1980 is a pivotal year. We changed administration, we'd be in the Ronald Reagan era. There were some conservative senators who said, do you guys want eminent domain too? Like, we're not going to give that to you. And the North Country Trail people said, oh, no, we don't need that. We'll settle for just dealing with willing sellers. Well, what happened, starting with North Country Trail and going down the line from the trails established in 1978 and 80 and up through 83, was no access to even federal funds for land acquisition, not just willing seller. And so there are about 9 trails after the first 2 trails, 3 through 11, that didn't have access to federal funds. And then, starting in 1983, the next wave, all the trails that came since then, had access to willing seller authority, but there are these ones like North Country that were stuck in this sort of pendulum swing way off here. And so in 2009, this organization, the Partnership for the National Trail System, along with help from lots of people in the grassroots all across the country, were able to restore willing seller authority to all those 9 trails. So that's one of the reasons why land acquisition and conservation of the trail corridor on the North Country Trail and the Ice Age Trail and the Continental Divide Trail and the Wilson Park Trail, etc., is now conceivable because there is access to federal funds for it. The irony is those federal funds have dried up like crazy because of the water conservation fund. So anyway, that I think is the most controversial issue that the trails face. Everything else that we deal with is mostly, the biggest issue is public ignorance. As all of you know, your neighbors, your friends, you say North Country Trail, and they say, what are you talking about? I never heard that. You say, well, it's been here for 25 years. Well, I still don't know that. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a PR person. I hunger for, Stephen Ambrose or somebody like that to write a book about the whole trail system, to do a movie, to have some PBS spots, to get the public thinking that, yes, here is something that's created for all Americans, that's nonpartisan, that's community-based, improves health, has all the benefits we all know about trails, place for charged-up volunteers to come work. But nobody's done that yet. So if any of you have